So, hello everybody and good morning from Finland. My name is Eija Ranta. I am Academy of Finland Research Fellow and University Lecturer of Global Development Studies at the University of Helsinki. The title for my talk today is Reforming and Resisting Development, the History and the Present of Development Alternatives. What I will be presenting is a book project that I'm working on right now in the field of critical development studies. It's a book project in which I aim to study diverse kinds of development alternatives to growth-based modernization and neoliberal paradigms. The book aims at defining and conceptualizing alternatives and utopian visions beyond capitalist development. Instead of merely conceptualizing them, I aim at historically nuanced analysis, looking at alternatives in specific historical times, examining in detail the 1960s, the 1990s, and contemporary times as times during which alternative thinking beyond capitalist development has been particularly vivid. The emphasis is on the global South and Latin America in particular. I see Latin America as an epicenter to critical thinking, revolutions, and active societal engagement in thinking development differently. Why a critical look at alternatives to capitalist development is needed? For many decades since the 1990s, the triumph of capitalist development and neoliberal globalization have been portrayed as foundational features of the global order. Debates about economy and politics are often presented as if there are no alternatives to neoliberal globalization and transnational dictations of political parameters. In his book on the Grenada Revolution, anthropologist David Scott discussed how the collapse of the Marxist and socialist revolutionary horizon led to disillusionments and lack of political imaginations about desirable futures. However, in contemporary times, we are in an urgent need for alternative ways of conceptualizing and practicing development. We live amidst increasingly polarized geopolitics, rising authoritarianism, militarization and war, and post-pandemic economic and social challenges. Furthermore, planetary crises, including the climate emergency, pollution, biodiversity loss, affects us all profoundly. In Latin America, during the 1990s, there was a wave of resistance to neoliberal globalization and increasing inequalities that neoliberalism brought. And it led to subsequent boom of progressive, indigenous, and green politics. As a contrast to previously held left-wing goals of heavy industrialization and one-party politics, the new utopian visions beyond capitalist development drew on decolonizing and communitarian political ideals and conviviality between humans and more than humans. The rise of the so-called pink tide governments of the early 2000s crystallized the demands of social and popular movements for the more egalitarian and redistributive politics, as exemplified in Brazil's social welfare programs, in Venezuela's 21st century socialism, and Bolivia's and Ecuador's attempts at constructing plurinational states in recognition of the indigenous peoples. And this latter is often discussed through the concepts of Buen Vivir and Vivir Bien, of which Anja was just earlier referring to in another Latin American context. Also currently, as a response to intensifying extractivism, which has also been pushed forward by many of the progressive governments in Latin America, post-extractivist politics can also be perceived as a utopian horizon currently rising in Latin America in response to the urgency of the planetary crisis. In this hopefully one day forthcoming book, I would like to study two aspects and their interlinkages. First of all, alternative paradigms and autonomous organizing beyond capitalist development, but also the post-Second World War development cooperation constellation, and looking at the interconnections between these two issues. I'm interested in whether and how they interconnect, how some alternatives with time become institutionalized, and where and in which conditions new kinds of alternative thinking and autonomous organizing emerges. As mentioned earlier, I am interested in particular decades, particular historical eras, and you can see them here in the slide. I find these as historical moments in which they have been booming times for societal activism and for social movements, as well as critical thinking about alternative conceptualizations of development or imaginary ideals of a better or desirable futures. I have listed here some of the examples of the kinds of issues that I would be interested in examining. Some of them might, of course, be considered today quite mainstream development thinking, and therefore I'm conceptualizing this book idea through these ideas of both reforming development and resisting development. And I'm interested in this constant dialogue between the reform and resistance. I have personally earlier investigated in detail this Buen Vivir and Vivir Bien thinking through long-term ethnographic engagement in Bolivia. And I'm also interested now in situating that particular thinking to wider field of alternatives, and also situating it, looking at its relationship with international development cooperation, apparatus, what kinds of linkages it has had in different decades, and at different moments of the introduction and spread of this conceptualization of Buen Vivir and Vivir Bien. While exploring alternatives, it also sheds light on what has been the prevailing or the orthodox paradigm of each decade. Nowadays, there's a lot of criticism of development, lots of criticism of capitalism, without explicitly stating or scrutinizing what is exactly being criticized, or what is the exact conceptualization of development, and how it manifests in different contexts and in different times. So my interest is to nuance and historicize the criticism of economic growth, criticism of Western modernity, the criticism of development. And I would like to look, for example, at the state-led capitalist modernization, neoliberal globalization, and current very strong discussion on colonialism and coloniality. To conclude, the preliminary ideas that I would like to pinpoint in the book is that just as alternative development approaches are responses to the development orthodoxy of each historical time, they are also multiple and historically contingent. Their importance and weight have varied in different times. Many so-called alternatives have become leading priorities for international development policy and practice, and radical political meanings attached to alternatives are easily bypassed when adapted to development cooperation. With this, I do not mean that all kinds of autonomous organizing or autonomous critical thinking and alternatives would be co-opted to some quite conservative international institutions, but some of them do, and I'm interested in how that happens. For example, currently, how development cooperation actors talk of decolonizing development, or talk of Buen Vivir or Ubuntu. So what does this do to those conceptualizations? What does it do to the radical discourse of thinking about the world differently? So I'm interested in those mechanisms. Some of the pending questions, there are of course many. This is absolutely totally work in progress at this moment. But some of the questions are: what unites those different eras when alternatives boom? Why they boom at certain times and do not on other times? And what are kind of the societal conditions, the larger political economic conditions of each time that condition the boom of alternative thinking. I think I will end here. And thank you so much for listening, and look forward to discussion later on. Thank you.